too true. When he'd been shot, he had been distracted in thinking about the bonny Megan with her flaming red hair and big midnight blue eyes, a more lovely lass he'd never come across. But he thought about her every time they raided near the English border, because that was where he'd met her, and lost her. Of course, he thought about her too much at other times, too, but that was his problem, and best left to him, not discussed in general, no matter what the purpose. "I stole her from the Englishman," Lachlan mumbled. "He merely retrieved her. There's a difference." "Retrieved her and beat the tar out of ye!" That reminder deserved a good clout, and Lachlan's punch, even lacking strength, still knocked Gilionan out of his crouch. Gilionan grunted in surprise as he landed on his backside, even though he'd been expecting and hoping for just such a reaction from his laird. Ranald, on the other hand, laughed. "Very good, Lachlan! Now, if you'll just put that same energy into getting your big self onto your wee horse, we'll get you home so Nessa can see to that wound." Lachlan groaned. Gilionan, having that same thought, snapped at Ranald. "Are ye daft, mon? I'd be running the opposite direction if I had Nessa fussing over me to look forward to. She bullies ye to wellness, she does, after she cries all over ye first. Och, it's a sickening sight, to be sure." Ranald lifted his brow. "You think she'd bully the laird?" "I know she would," Lachlan mumbled, and fitting punishment, he added to himself, for his own stupidity. With that thought, he rolled over and forced himself to his hands and knees. His vision blurred, not that he could see much to begin with, as dark as it was. A good time for reaving, a moonless night. But reaving and mooning sure as hell didn't mix, and he was going to have to do something about separating them, if he survived this fiasco. "Point me toward the wee beastie," he told his friends. They did more than that. They tried to help him up. In the end, they were more trouble than help, and he shrugged them both off with a growl. But somehow he got back in the saddle, and somehow his two kinsmen managed to get him home, though he had very little memory of that long, grueling ride, and the stops on the way that saw his wound tended to before Nessa got her hands on it. She did get her hands on it, though, and on him, and it was a frustrating 3 weeks before he was able to insist that she leave him be and have her pay attention to that command. The problem with Nessa was she fancied herself in love with Lachlan, and took it for granted that they'd be married some day, though he'd never given her the least encouragement. But the fact that he'd never seriously courted anyone else was all the encouragement she seemed to need. Yet when had he had time to do any courting? He'd had the responsibility of the entire clan dropped on him at such a young age. Nessa lived in his household, as did a great many others of his clan. She'd been underfoot for as long as he could remember, his playmate when they were younger, a nuisance when he started becoming interested in girls, because he didn't put her in that category, tomboy that she was. She was 5 years younger than his 26, had a devil of a temper, and had pretty much taken over his household when his father died, and his stepmother absconded with every tangible bit of the MacGregor wealth, aside from the land, forcing him into the unwanted life of a reaver. He had told the bonny Megan that reaving ran in his family, but it wasn't true. It had been more than 200 years since his family had actively taken to the roads late of a night, and even back then it had been more to bedevil other clans than to fill the coffers. The MacGregor wealth had come down through the years from royal gifts, a few shrewd endeavours, and one lucky gambler, but there had been a sizable amount to pay for repairs to the old castle, pay for the innumerable weddings that cropped up yearly, and to make sure no one ever went without whatever was needful. The few crops they sowed were seasonal. The small sheep and cattle herds they had couldn't feed the entire household on a regular basis, any more than they ever had. And the one investment that had continued to supply them with ready cash each year had gone sour. Yet they still would have fared well if it weren't for Lady Winifred. It put Lachlan in a foul mood whenever he thought of what his stepmother had cost the clan. She hadn't raised him, though she had been at Castle Cregora for a goodly number of his growing years. He hadn't disliked her during the 12 years of her marriage to his father. She had simply been there, part of the landscape, with an occasional smile, but rarely more than that, since she was simply too flighty to be bothered with children, was always concerned only with herself and, of course, his father. Never would anyone have guessed that she was a thief, but that she was. Not 1 week after her husband's death, she up and disappeared, and Lachlan's inheritance went with her. They searched for her for more than a year, but no